Hey, Steve, there's one last topic, and I'm kind of up against it, but I really want to get your opinion on because it just kind of hit me the other day, even though I look at schedules almost every day, just like you do throughout the off season. It kind of hit me the other day, the lack of big games in the collection of non-conference games for the Big Ten against versus the other leagues, and whether that's going to hurt the conference or help the conference. And it all depends on the scenario. If Ohio State or Michigan sitting there at 11-1, then 12-1 after they win the Big Ten without the embarrassing loss that Ohio State suffered over the last 2 years, then they should be safe, and nobody's going to say Ohio State didn't play anyone in the non-conference schedule. Of course, Michigan would be a different case with the Notre Dame win under its belt. But when I look at the collection of big games, quote, big games for the Big Ten, I'm looking at Notre Dame, Stanford, Iowa State, and then it just drops off the cliff. Nobody else plays anyone significant. For Penn State, it's Pitt. For Nebraska, it's Colorado, and on and on and on, where there's just a stack of them for the SEC and the ACC. The SEC, for example, 2 games against Clemson, a Texas game, Miami, who am I missing? Also a Notre Dame game, and on and on and on. I don't know. Again, if there's a tiebreaker situation like there has been a number of years, and this has been the Ohio State. The fascination with Ohio State is every year that there's been a playoff, they've been on the line, whether selected or dropped. They've been right on that line every time. So if it's that again, then the Big Ten doesn't look good because they're unless they just clean house and just make sure that they hold serve and win all those games or just about all those games, versus these other conferences have those top 10 type matchups in the non-conference.
I think that's a very good point you're making. In fact, you go back last year, you can make an argument. The only really quality non-conference win, when you look at what TCU was 6-6, and they had to pull a big upset the last week of the year to get bowl eligible, remember? So really the only quality non-conference win the Big Ten had last year was Iowa beating Iowa State. That was the best non-conference win that the league had a year ago. Northwestern didn't win a non-conference game last year and then went undefeated in the West Division. So I do think that is a factor that we could run into in November for the final, or December for the final playoff rankings. The first thing we got to figure out, though, is I think it's going to be difficult for a team to get through this league without 2 losses. And now I'm not one who thinks a 2-loss team can't make it. I keep pointing this out. Auburn was number 2 in the country with 2 losses heading into the SEC championship game in 2017. If they had beaten Georgia, they would have been in the playoff. Hell, they might have been the number 1 seed, because then they would have beaten Georgia, Alabama, and Georgia 3 straight weeks. So I don't believe that they don't want a 2-loss team. I don't buy into that. But the problem is that who that second loss is often to. Is it a faceplant like Ohio State had against Iowa a couple of years ago, right? That's really the question. So I think before we even debate your point, we got to see if anybody can get through this league with 1 loss or fewer, which I'm doubtful that can occur.
I went out on a limb. I actually predicted 3 2-loss teams are going to make the playoffs. Clemson's in the clubhouse with no losses. Alabama loses 1 in the regular season, loses to Georgia in the SEC championship game, who had 2 losses from the regular season. Ohio State loses 2 during the course of the Big Ten schedule. With all that, they've got a rough schedule, but then they hit the big house. I think they're going to eke out another win. That leaves Ohio State and Michigan both at 10-2. Ohio State wins the Big Ten at 11-2. I've got 3 losses from Texas in upsetting Oklahoma to win the Big 12. And then I think the Pac-12 again, it's like a 10-3 champion. So I don't
think that's nuts. Yeah, I don't think that's nuts. I think we're overdue for a 2007 kind of year. In fact, I forecasted that in my preview, where you had a 2-loss LSU win the national championship, and it was how many different teams were number 1. Ohio State was number 1 a couple of weeks that season as well. So I think we're kind of overdue for that kind of a year. And I'll close. I know you're up against it, so let me just make this last point. I think everybody's way undervaluing the Dylan Moses injury at Alabama. That's by far, and it's not even close, the biggest preseason camp injury in college football. That was the weak by Alabama standards. All right. But understand, Alabama, if 9-3 is like finishing last to them. Okay. It's playoff or bust. So that at linebacker was already the position where they had two great players, and then behind them, nothing but youngsters. Remember 2 years ago in 2017 when they barely made the playoff, they didn't win their division, they got housed by Auburn at the end. Why? Because they had so much youth and inexperience at that linebacker position. Dylan Moses was the top linebacker prospect in next year's NFL draft. He was the captain of that unit. When you're dealing with, if we don't win the national championship, our fans think it's a failure for the next 8 months. That injury, I think, is a massive injury for Alabama. And I think that's being way undervalued because people just think, as Nick Saban says, they're just going to crap out another player. Not even Alabama just craps out another Dylan Moses. Okay. There might be a player on their roster that might be Dylan Moses in 2020 and 2021. They weren't planning on that guy being ready to be Dylan Moses in 2019. I think that's a major injury that's not being talked about enough.
Because of the term captain that you just eloquently stated, it's not just the next 5-star off the bus. It's a leader, inspirational leader, the guy that lines everybody up, the traffic cop, the guy that gets everybody set and inspires the defense as well.
Well said.
Steve Dave's Michigan podcast does a tremendous job there. Please check out it as a Middle Tennessee's on the slate, and then more fascinating games to follow. Steve, we appreciate you stopping by. Hopefully we can corral you more often.
You bet, brother. Go Blue. Take care.